Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Final Disaster. This is Battlefield 1. In today's episode of Fixing Battlefield, I wanted to take the time to talk about Zerging in Battlefield 1, what causes it, what it actually is, and how it possibly could be improved or remedied in Battlefield 1. Starting off, of course, with the logical point, what is Zerging actually and what does it mean in Battlefield 1? Well, Zerging is essentially the practice of players grouping up in very large groups and focusing on one given objective at a time, one given area. Now, on the basis, this sounds simply like good team play, but we're not talking about a squad sticking together and attacking or defending an objective. We're talking about 16 of the 32, 24 of the 32, possibly all 32 of the 32 players attacking one objective and only that objective. And this is a little bit of a frustrating mechanic for both sides of the equation, for both teams involved. First of all, on the receiving end of the Zerg, the team that then tries to defend their objectives. Well, it's essentially a hopeless practice. You have to give up every objective that is being attacked unless you counter Zerg. Because in Battlefield 1, really independent of how good of a player you are, numbers are really what decides the outcome of any given firefight on an objective, especially with the higher time to kill that we have in Battlefield 1 compared to other and previous Battlefield games. Essentially, if you're outnumbered 2 to 1 on an objective, that is to say 3 to 6, 3 to 10, there's no way you're going to be able to hold that objective unless you truly are an exceptionally good player and the enemy players are rather poor at what they are trying to accomplish. On the other side of the equation, you have the team Zerging. Now, there is benefits to Zerging. Amongst them, it's very unlikely that you die because there's usually medics around that can revive you. It's also a lot easier to deal with some of the more potent threats on the battlefield, but the disadvantage of this practice is that eventually actually you're going to probably lose the game, because if your team only ever focuses on one objective at any given time on a Conquest game with 5, 6, 7, 8 Conquest points, you're not going to win. You need to hold the majority of the Conquest points, not just one, and one team traveling around the map in one group simply doesn't get around the map quick enough to recapture all the capture points they need to hold the majority in any given game. So essentially, you trade in a decent KD maybe and a decent amount of points for losing the game, which is of course frustrating, especially to those who don't necessarily take part in the Zerging mentality and find themselves trying to carry their team to victory in what seems like an impossible task. While the basics of Zerging are relatively clear, what causes it is a little bit more difficult, especially when trying to ascertain why it is more pronounced or at least more noticeable in Battlefield 1 compared to, for example, Battlefield 4. And there are a number of reasons, some of which apply to the Battlefield franchise as whole, some of which apply to specifically just Battlefield 1. One of them, and this is specific to Battlefield 1, is the Conquest scoring system, and I'm well aware that has been recently changed for the better in this department. Nevertheless, after 7 months of playing the game, which a Conquest point reward system that rewards only those who capture the point, not really those that defend the point, and not really those who are in and around involved combat on the point, it becomes second nature that if you want to play the game successfully, you want to level up, you want your points, you always have to be on the objective. And the best way to capture an objective, independent of whether you lose or you win, is actually just to travel in a group from objective to objective, capturing it in an ideal situation without any real resistance. Now, this is just one of the aspects that causes Zerging. Another, and this is applied more generally to the Battlefield franchise, is security in numbers. Independent of which game you look at, you are less likely to die if you are in a group of players. We've already talked about the higher chance of reviving, but especially in Battlefield 1, there are, as we will get into a little bit later, a number of threats that truly require teamwork, where being in a group is beneficial and will simply mean not only that you perceive yourself to be safer from some of the many threats out there, but you do actually have a longer time to live on the battlefield when engaging in these practices. And in the end, despite it being a first-person shooter, nobody wants to die and everybody wants to be slaying the enemy. We move on then to another point specific to Battlefield 1, which actually has a number of subcategories, subpoints if you will, and it all centers around the role of the lone wolf in Battlefield 1, substantially reduced from what we had in Battlefield 4. In Battlefield 4, lone wolfing was a definite possibility. You were always better off in a small squad working as team, and that was intentional, but you could do some serious damage on your own as well. You could take out multiple targets without trouble. The time to kills were short enough that you could take somebody out before necessarily the other person had enough time to react and fully down you. That way you could deal with much more in the sense of dangers and targets dependent on how capable you really were. And this wasn't really a matter of a huge skill gap, but was really available to all players out there. For me personally, it's one of the aspects of Battlefield 4's combat I find more enjoyable compared to Battlefield 1. Now this lone wolf mentality, or the fact that it doesn't really work in Battlefield 1, means that you are forced into groups. You have to stick together. And sadly, somewhat the consequence has been not necessarily that people stick together in squads. That happens as well, especially with players who know how the game works, but people seem to just stick in massive groups, traveling as one herd across the battlefield. Having then talked about engaging multiple targets and the higher time to kill in the context of the lone wolf, another point to mention is the longer capture times. At least it seems so to me. It takes a very long time to capture a point in a game of Conquest, even if you're the only person on the point or there's 5 friendlies on the point. Now what this means is a small group of players who attacks an enemy objective have a much harder time than necessarily you would think taking that objective, because while there may not be any resistance on that point at that given point in time, because of the longer time it takes to neutralize the flag and capture it, the enemy team has a larger window of opportunity to spawn in onto the flag and try to defend it. Essentially, you're facing quite a substantial obstacle in taking objectives with smaller groups of teams, or let alone from a capable enemy team that is willing to defend their objective. Another extremely important point that diminishes the ability to lone wolf things in Battlefield 1, which in my opinion inevitably leads to the Zerging mentality, is the fact that vehicles and elite classes being in Battlefield 4 only really comparable to the battle pickups, which weren't close to as influential as the elite classes that we have now, they're just generally overall more powerful. They usually require quite a bit of teamwork to take out, and tanks are a prime example of that. No assault player is going to be able to take a heavy tank out on their own unless they're using mines and C4, which are either quite tedious ways of taking out tanks, require quite a bit of patience, or in most situations aren't practical. The main anti-tank weaponry of the assault are its anti-tank grenades and its AT rockets, and unless your tank driver is a complete idiot and just lets you dump all your explosive goodness onto him, you as solo assault player are going to have a very tough time actually taking out that tank on your own. So you are almost forced to work in teams to take out these key enemy assets on the battlefield. And you know what? That's not necessarily bad that you have to work in teams, but we do have to recognize that this does facilitate and does encourage people not only to group up into small squads, but group up into huge teams, where it becomes much easier than to take out these quite looming threats on the battlefield. Another thing that nicely ties into the additional security and amenities that comes with traveling in a big group, health, ammo, and that all plenty, is the fact that damage in Battlefield 1, at least personally, seems to come in and from every angles, from the most random of sources, which can be very difficult to predict. And that means that you essentially constantly need healing, even if you aren't really engaging in too many firefights. This once more comes down to the higher time to kill, but also comes down to the plethora of explosive spam going on, the plethora of indirect fire weapons, things like mortars, things like grenade launchers, things like grenade crossbows that cause constant disruption, constant damage, which requires constant medical attention and which requires constant resupplies to be able to continue using them as a primary weapon, as so many players do. But having then discussed a little bit what Zerging is and why it is, in my opinion, more pronounced in Battlefield 1 than it was in, say, Battlefield 4, what possible solutions are there out there to reduce the amount of Zerging going on? Well, this is by far the most difficult part of this video, and I'm not going to claim to have all the solutions. A personal few ideas I do nevertheless have. First and foremost, we need more encouraging for defending actual flags. I know there's point bonuses given, especially for holding the majority of flags now in any given Conquest game, but in my opinion, it simply isn't enough. Players are still not willing to defend flags. Really, defending flags should be more beneficial than maybe capturing flags, especially if those flags were not enemy flags but neutral flags. You should be enticed to defend a flag from an incoming enemy push. Now, the balance that needs to be struck here is ensuring that that players don't just camp on objectives all day long, but enticing more defensive behavior, in my opinion, will break up that Zerging mentality just a little bit for the better. A couple ways you could possibly do this is by offering additional bonus points for individuals that spawn onto contested flags, or offering significant point bonuses for killing targets on any flag that is currently being captured that is actually your team's flag. There is really many ways of going about it. The important thing is that something is done to encourage more defensive play on the side of players looking to level up and get a good amount of points in every game. Now we move on then to the individual weapon, and we somewhat skirted around this topic earlier, and that is the high time to kill. Now, it's been discussed plentiful in Battlefield 1 subreddits by other Battlefield YouTubers, so I don't really want to go in it too much, but if you empower individuals to take on more than just one target at any given time, more capably, more easily, you'll find that players are more willing to engage in combat in smaller groups or even lone wolf it and attack objectives, because they are less likely to get shut down simply on the basis of a slightly more favorable number outcome for the enemy team. What I mean by that, of course, is them having more players in that given area of the map. Now, a more controversial way of maybe encouraging and breaking this Zerging mentality is to actually offer bonus points for those players who attack objectives that their team otherwise isn't attacking. So what I mean by this is, if you have 10 players attacking objective A on your team and you're the 11th player and you neutralize and capture the full objective, you should maybe be getting less points than a player who, together with only 2 others, does the same to an enemy objective. Say they get 50% more points, because not only are they risking more and they're going to have to, essentially assuming somewhat of a response from the enemy team, do more to keep and capture that objective, but this would essentially also encourage players to spread out more and try to focus on multiple objectives on any given map at multiple times, spreading the combat more nicely across the map and avoiding a number of other issues that come on certain maps with choke points and too many players in one given area. Those at least are my thoughts on Zerging, what it is, what causes it in Battlefield 1, and what possibly could be done to reduce it. I welcome, of course, your opinions, your experiences down below in the comments, as well as, of course, your usual video suggestions. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. But with all that being said, I'd like to thank you very much for watching, and hope to see you in the next Battlefield 1 video.